This is the Content Marketing Podcast, episode number 95, Storytelling 101, Why Storytelling and Why Now? Hello and welcome to the Content Marketing Podcast. This is the show where we help you attract and retain business through the power of quality content. I'm your host, Rachel Parker of Resonance Content Marketing, and today is November 6th, 2014. Hello, and thank you for joining us today for episode number 95 of the Content Marketing Podcast. While we are just barreling towards that big 100th episode milestone, hard to believe. Anyway, I'm planning some pretty special festivities around that 100th episode, and that's going to include a pretty cool giveaway. So stay tuned over the next couple of weeks. We will be sharing more details. Just a reminder, we are live on iTunes and on Stitcher, so if you're listening to this episode on the blog, you can click on over and subscribe. It means you'll get new episodes automatically delivered to your listening device of choice. And if you use a different app for your podcast listening pleasure, we also have an RSS feed, and I will provide that link in the blog post. In our last episode, which was the day before Halloween, I believe, we talked about content-killing monsters, what they are, and how to avoid them. If you happen to miss that episode, feel free to click on over to iTunes or to Stitcher or to the RSS feed and get all caught up. Before I go into our content today, I want to give a shout out to a longtime friend of this podcast. That is Michael Werberberger. He is the founder and CEO of Digital M in Austria. And, Michael's been like I said, longtime friend of the show. He's frequently tweeted links to our podcast. He has, we've tweeted back and forth. He's had a lot of good things to say and to share about this about the show. Excuse me. Anyway, he tweeted me last week and said he really enjoyed our episode on mobile e-newsletters, about how to customize your e-newsletter for mobile users. And he asked very nicely if he might share some of these ideas on his blog. With full attribution, of course. So, of course, I was honored and delighted to receive his request and absolutely approved. So, if you go to Michael's blog, and I will provide that link in the blog post, you will find a post called So macht ihr eure E-Mails fit für mobile Endgeräte. And that is Michael's post. Basically, the translation is, here's how to make your emails fit for mobile users. So if you are so inclined, I invite you to check it out if you happen to read German, and to share it with your followers. So anyway, thank you, Michael, for your request, and I was happy to share my content with a wider audience. And if you are listening right now and you hear something that you want to share, I invite you to do the same. Just hit me up, and I will be happy to give my permission for that. Okay, so on to today's topic. Oh my gosh, I am so excited about the month of November, not just because it's cooler weather here in Houston. Praise God and all his angels. Not just because it's football season. Again, wonderful. Not just because it's my birthday month. Got a birthday coming up on the 17th. But because this month is going to be all about storytelling here at Resonance. We're going to be talking about storytelling here on the podcast, on our blog, in our weekly video tips. And it's a topic I really get excited about. And I think you will too. So we are going to get into today's topic about storytelling. But first, it's time to check in with our news feed for this week's rundown of news you can use. Something pretty cool on SlideShare that just rolled out last week. SlideShare is, of course, now a LinkedIn company. LinkedIn purchased them, I want to say, about this time last year, maybe. So as a LinkedIn company, they got together with their parent company and offered something really cool called the Professional Journey. And what it does is it goes into your LinkedIn profile and it generates a really neat interactive infographic representing your total career. So the little pop-out, slide-out sections on your education and your experience, and it's really cool. You have to see it to believe it, and I will share a link. I will share a link to mine in the blog post so you can see what one looks like. But anyway, it is very cool. It's free. It's open to everyone who uses LinkedIn and SlideShare. It's shareable, so you can share it with your audiences on your various social networks. And I recommend you check it out. And I will provide that link in the blog post. Both I can show you what mine looks like, and I will provide the link where you can set up your own professional journey to create and share with your followers. Also wanted to mention a little bit about SEO. Now, there's been a lot of, since SEO is a part of what we do as content marketers, I like to include news items about SEO here and there. So recently, actually on October 17th, Google released a new update to its Penguin algorithm. Now, Penguin was the update introduced in 2012, and it cracks down on sites using spammy techniques like paying for links or keyword stuffing, things like that. Things trying to trick Google into thinking they're more popular than they actually are. And, every time Google releases an update, it just causes widespread panic across the webmaster community. And of course, that includes a lot of us content marketers who keep an eye on what's happening with SEO. So I looked into this update. It turns out it affects about 1% of websites. And, I will say about this what I say about all Google updates. If you are creating quality content that speaks to your audience in their language, I think you're fine. Now, yes, we do need to do keyword research, make sure we're using the right keywords and placing them strategically. But as long as your focus is on your audience and you're not trying to trick the system or game the system or, game the Google system in any way, I think you're fine. But I did want to mention there has been an update. I don't think it's anything you need to worry about. So that is my take on Penguin 3.0. And of course, Google's very secretive about these updates. They're not secretive about them happening, but they're really kind of close-lipped about what they actually mean. So we don't actually know what this means, and we don't know if it's really that big of a deal. So let's just keep your eyes open to what's going on, but I wouldn't take it too. I wouldn't get too stressed out about it. That's my advice for you for this week. Okay, our content hit of the week is a post called How Researching Competitors Can Improve Your Blog Content. This is a great post by Ian Cleary over on the Social Media Examiner blog. And what he does is he shows you some really cool tools that can help you to analyze your competitors' content, specifically their blogs. And the idea is not to copy them, of course, but to use that intelligence to guide your own content activities. You can see what topics are getting the most traffic, what titles are doing better, what types of media are getting the most eyeballs, and that can be really useful information as you go to plan your own content strategy, especially as we're gearing up for 2015. So really interesting read, and I will provide the link to that in the blog post for this episode. That is it for this week's update. If you stumble across something you think might be of interest to your fellow content marketers, please shoot it on over to us so we can share. Now it's time for this week's Spotlight segment. As I said, November is all about storytelling here at Resonance, and I'm really excited. It's a topic I'm really passionate about. And storytelling, it's become a huge buzzword in the marketing industry. I think half the people talking about storytelling don't really know what they're talking about. So we are dedicating this entire month to helping you make sense of storytelling and its role in marketing, and to showing you how to leverage storytelling for your own content marketing program. And today we're going to kick things off by answering the overarching question, why storytelling and why now? For just a moment, I want you to imagine walking into a lecture hall. And imagine that this is a place you just do not want to be. Let's say you're settling in for what you expect to be the most boring presentation that you've ever had to sit through. Maybe your boss is making you go, or maybe your boss is presenting, or maybe you need continuing education credits, or maybe a friend dragged you there. So you kind of have to be there, but you really don't want to be. You're just settling in for the longest 50 minutes of your life. And so you take your seat, and the lecturer walks on stage and walks up to the podium and says, "Let me tell you a story." Now, in that moment, what happens when you hear those 6 words? What happens when you're just, it would rather be anywhere else and are just settled in for the most boring hour of your life, and you hear, "Let me tell you a story"? Do you maybe sit up a little bit straighter? Do you lean forward a little bit? Maybe your ears perk up when you hear those 6 words? If so, there's a reason for that. And that reason is that human beings are hardwired for stories. We love stories. They're ingrained in our DNA. No matter what nationality you are, what generation you are, we are hardwired for stories. So think about the billions of dollars and pounds and euros and all other currencies that are spent every single year on story. And by spending on story, I mean movies, television shows, books, theater, video games involve a story element. We're just hooked on stories. That's the bottom line. So given this fact, what does this have to do with marketing? Well, for one thing, great marketers have always been storytellers. Okay, some of the greatest marketing campaigns of all time have involved story. And, I want you to think back to your childhood and think back to some of the TV ads that you remember growing up. Those ads you saw on television that stuck with you throughout the years. I know for myself, when I was growing up in the 70s, the one that clearly sticks out to me is the famous Coca-Cola Mean Joe Green commercial where Mean Joe's limping off the field and kid offers him his Coke and Mean Joe drinks it and tosses the kid his jersey. And that has stuck with me through 30 plus years. I can still visualize the entire commercial. Think about Apple's iconic ad in 1984 with the kind of Big Brother scenario and the woman carrying the hammer up to the big screen and just smashing it to show that, we're not going to live by these rules anymore. More recently, think about Google's wonderful ad called Parisian Love, which was all it showed was a computer screen. And you saw no faces, you heard no voices, but it was just a person typing in, and started off typing in study abroad, and then, places to eat in Paris, and then how to impress a French girl. And it takes the viewer through this entire story of this young man going to Paris, falling in love, picking a church to get married in, and then the final screen, he's typing in how to assemble a crib. And it's just, everybody just melts. But that's something that has stuck with us. So marketers have really always understood the power of story. So what is that connection between story and marketing? Number one, stories evoke emotion. And, just about any sales training program will tell you that people buy on emotion and rationalize with logic. And that's true. Stories can evoke emotion in a way that facts and figures simply cannot. And, in thinking about this, I remembered a presentation I saw just about a year ago. Robin Phillips from, the name of her agency escapes me. I apologize for that. But she was speaking at a conference, and she was talking about a client of theirs who it's a nonprofit to battle sex trafficking around the world. And she told the story, again with the story, she told the story about how they were sitting with this client and trying to figure out the positioning for this nonprofit to gain donations. And he was saying things like, every 5 minutes a child is kidnapped into the sex trade, and just using all these shocking statistics. And the team was just kind of like, yeah, that paints a powerful picture, but it doesn't really have flesh and blood. So they got this client to start telling some of his stories about his research as head of this organization. And he got to telling this story about how he and his team had posed as buyers at a brothel in one of these countries. And the girls just had numbers on them, and the clients would choose the girls based on the number. But there was one girl who he saw he could see she had some fight left in her. He could see that she had some spirit and some fight in her eyes. And that girl's number was 146. So the team latched onto that and they renamed the organization Love 146. And you may have seen some of their messaging around. And when they made that shift between just telling statistics and storytelling, their donations just took off and their engagement took off, and people started wearing 146 stickers to show their support. I mean, it was just a huge movement that was brought about by that simple shift into storytelling. So that's just one example about how stories evoke emotion and how that emotion leads to achieving our goals. The second connection between storytelling and marketing is that stories establish connection. So say you go to a networking event and you meet someone who you think might be a good partner for you. You might be able to collaborate on some things. You might have some joint partnership potential down the road. Just think about the track of that friendship. So when you first meet the person, you're probably, say, what do you do? And you exchange your elevator speeches and, oh, tell me about your company. And when we spout out our brochure copy, right? So maybe from there you agreed to meet for coffee and you spent a little more time getting to know each other. And then from there you might have gone on to lunch and spent a little more time getting to know each other. Well, chances are over that time you started to share some stories. And those stories are points of connection. So after seeing this person 3 or 4 times, you probably felt you know them pretty well. And part of that, of course, is just spending time with them and getting to know them. But part of that is probably because you were able to share some stories. And you might not even have realized that you were sharing stories, but they were probably at least part of some of those conversations. Speaking of that, I want to share an experience that I had recently. I went to meet with a potential client and walked into the lobby and spoke to the receptionist. And my contact wasn't quite ready for me yet. She was on a conference call, so the receptionist invited me to have a seat in the lobby and wait for a few minutes. And while I was waiting, I noticed 2 things that really impressed me. Number one, there was a huge plaque in that lobby with pictures of the founders of the company and the story of how the company got started. I mean, this was a huge plaque. You could not miss it. And it was a very nice story. Not too long, but it did tell the entire story about how the company got started, how the guys knew each other. They both worked for the same big company and they had an idea to do things differently. And then one partner left, and it really, it kind of got you caught up from where the company started to where it is today. So I thought that was pretty neat. And then I sat down after looking at this plaque, and I saw on the coffee table in front of the sofa was a book labeled Yearbook 2013, and sounded interesting, so I picked it up and started looking at it, and it was the equivalent of a high school yearbook, but it was for this company. So at the beginning, they had everybody's headshot, just like we had, back in high school, and then they had photos from every single event throughout the year. So they had pictures of team building events, they had pictures from for example, from Movember, when the guys grow their mustaches to show their support for cancer research, had pictures from that. They had pictures from, the big party they had for their CEO's birthday or something like that. And then not only did they have the company functions, but as you flip through, you also notice that every employee who got married during that year, they had a wedding photo. Every employee who welcomed a baby into the family, they had baby pictures there. And it really was a true yearbook. And I thought that was just clever beyond belief and so engaging. It really told me who these folks were. I got to see the team members. I got to see them having fun and interacting. I got to see what's important to them. I got to see, got a little peek into their families with the wedding and the baby pictures. And I was really impressed because I came away really feeling like I knew this company. So when my contact was ready for me and we got up and went to the conference room, I felt like I really knew them in a way that I would not have otherwise known had I not been exposed to that plaque and to that book. So again, coming back to the notion that we do business with people we know and like, and one way to In other words, we do business with people we're connected with people we feel a connection to. And stories are one way to establish that connection. And the third thing I want to mention is that stories are memorable. Now, as marketers, our holy grail really is to be top of mind. We want to be memorable because when that need for our product or service comes up, man, we want to be absolutely on the tip of that person's tongue when they talk about who is going to help us with this issue. And stories are one way for us to be memorable. I remember several years ago, I was a speaker at the HIMA conference, which is the Houston Interactive Marketing Association, and I was talking about content strategy. And I started my presentation with this goofy little story, this goofy little fairy tale that I made up about king content. And it was, king content. Everybody called him king, but they didn't really respect him. And it was just this goofy little fairy tale that I just made up, and I illustrated it with, believe it or not, clip art. And but I used that as an intro to my topic, the topic of content strategy. Well, fast forward 5 years later, and I am meeting a new contact. So a company who was doing business with me had a new contact move into the role that I was dealing with, and I was meeting him for the first time and just kind of getting to know him. And he said, "I remember when you presented at HIMA." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, you had that story with king content and the wizards and the fairy godmother." And he just related to me the exact story that I had told 5 years earlier. And I was just blown away by that. But it really illustrates how powerful, how stories really stick in our memories. Stories really are memorable, even goofy little fairy tales illustrated with clip art, but they stick with us. And remember the ads I talked about earlier, the Mean Joe Green ad and the Apple 1984 ad and the Parisian Love, those stick with us. And we do not easily forget a good story that has formed a connection with us. So those are just a few of the reasons why marketers really need to be storytellers, and especially content marketers. So why now? Now, as I said, storytelling in marketing is nothing new. Marketers have been telling stories for as long as they've been marketers. But why is it so important now? I really think that now we marketers are just up against such a challenge. We are struggling to be heard in the most crowded, the noisiest marketplace that has ever existed. I mean, consumers are being bombarded with marketing messages almost 24/7. It's ridiculous. And even in the content world, it's becoming more and more crowded as more and more brands latch on to content marketing. There's more and more content being put out. And again, we find ourselves just struggling to cut through the noise and to be heard. Well, stories give us that opportunity to cut through all that noise, to cut through all that clutter, and really to put out something that touches the emotions, that establishes connections, and to share something that's truly memorable, that's really going to stick in the minds of our audiences. And that's why it's especially important for us content marketers. That's why we at Resonance are devoting an entire month to storytelling. So I encourage you to stay tuned for more as we proceed through the month. As always, I hope this makes sense. If you have a question or want to join the conversation, would love to hear from you, and you can hit me up at AskRachelParker.com. Now it's time for our content marketing tip of the week. For today's tip, I want to talk about the importance of telling your story. Now, we just talked about how stories are so powerful for establishing connection. We know that people do business with people they know and like, and one way that people can get to know you and get to know your company is by hearing your stories, like the potential client I talked about with the plaque in their lobby that told the story of their company. So I encourage you to get out there and start telling your stories. Tell the story of how your company was founded. Tell the story of how you got the idea for your product or services. Tell the story of how your team came together. Whatever it is you need to do to really tell the audience who you are and why it is that you do what you do and where you came from and why it's so important that you are here in this space right here, right now. What that's going to do is two things. Number one, you're going to set yourself apart from your competitors because nobody has your story. Your story is absolutely unique to you and to nobody else. And number two, you're going to set the foundation for a true connection. You can really start connecting with those audiences so that when you do come on with your marketing message, they're much more likely to sit up and listen. Okay, campers, that is it for me today. Hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Content Marketing Podcast. If you like what you've heard today, please feel free to subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher or via our RSS feed. And if you really like what you've heard, please leave us a quick review on iTunes. And I want to thank those of you who have left us reviews. Very good to see. For more information about content marketing, you're welcome to visit our website at resonancecontent.com, where you'll also find links to our pages on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and other social networks. If you'd like to submit a question to cover in an upcoming tip of the week, just go to askrachelparker.com, type in your question, and we will get it answered. As always, I like to leave you with a quote, and today's comes from one of the greatest storytellers of all time. That is Hans Christian Andersen. He once said, quote, "Life itself is the most wonderful fairy tale of all," unquote. Again, this is Rachel Parker with Resonance Content Marketing. Thank you again for listening, and we will see you again next week. Take care.